Welcome back, everyone, to the Duo Dialogues. We've really been diving deep into different aspects of speaking English, haven't we? We've tackled introductions, gotten the hang of asking all sorts of questions, and even explored how to paint vivid pictures with our words. But you know what? Today, we're taking on something that's absolutely fundamental to how we communicate, something we do pretty much every single day. We're going to explore how to talk about the past.
You're absolutely right. Think about it for a second. How often do you find yourself recounting a memorable experience, or sharing a funny anecdote from your childhood, or even just explaining what you got up to over the weekend? Being able to talk about past events in a clear and engaging way is a core communication skill, whether you're just having a casual chat with a friend or navigating a more formal setting like a job interview.
Exactly. It's so essential. So in this deep dive, we're going to break down the nuts and bolts of effectively talking about what's already happened. We'll start with the building blocks, like mastering those tricky past tense verbs, and then move on to some really useful techniques for structuring your stories, to make them more captivating and impactful. Ready to jump in?
Let's do it. So first up, we've got to tackle the foundation of talking about the past tense verbs. And as you might already know, there are two main types we'll be working with, regular and irregular verbs. With regular verbs, things are pretty straightforward. You typically just add "ed" to the base form of the verb, like walk becomes walked, listen turns into listened, and discover changes to discovered. Pretty simple, right?
Yeah, those seem fairly manageable, but then you've got the irregular verbs. Those are the ones that can throw a wrench in the works, right? They don't follow the same neat ed pattern.
Exactly. Irregular verbs like to do their own thing. They often change their form completely. Take go, for instance, which becomes went. Eat shifts to ate, see becomes saw, and take turns into took. These are the ones you really need to just learn and memorize.
It's like they have their own secret code. But it's not just about knowing the past tense form of the verb, is it? We've got to figure out how to use these verbs and sentences to talk about different kinds of past events.
Absolutely. Beyond the simple past tense, which we use for actions that were completed in the past, like yesterday I watched a really interesting documentary, we have other tools that can add more depth and detail to our storytelling.
Right, like the past continuous tense. When would you use that, and how does it actually work?
The past continuous is perfect for describing an action that was ongoing at a specific point in the past. It's like setting the scene in motion. It usually involves was or were, followed by the ing form of the verb, which is called the present participle. For example, I was walking home when I bumped into an old friend, or the sun was shining brightly as we set off on our hike.
Oh, I see. So it's like painting a picture of what was happening in the background. It's about creating that sense of ongoing action.
Exactly. And then we have the past perfect tense. Now, this one is used to talk about an action that was completed before another action in the past. We often use had followed by the past participle of the verb. For regular verbs, the past participle is the same as the simple past tense, like walked in had walked. But it can be different for irregular verbs, like seen in had seen. So you might say something like, I had already finished dinner by the time my guests arrived. Or she had never traveled abroad before she went to Italy.
Okay, so the past perfect helps us create a clear sequence of events, showing which action happened first. So we've covered the simple past for finished actions, the past continuous for ongoing actions, and the past perfect for actions that were completed before another past action. That's a pretty solid foundation, wouldn't you say?
Definitely. And you know what really helps to clarify these past events for your listener? Specific time phrases. Think of them like signposts. They instantly signal to your audience that you're about to recount something that's already happened.
What kind of phrases work well for this? Can you give us some common examples?
Sure, you might start a sentence with something like last month, or when I was a child. Or you could say a few years ago, or just the other day. These time markers help to ground your story in the past.
I get it. They're like those little flags that say, hey, this happened in the past, like last week I went to see a fantastic play, or when I was younger I used to spend hours reading comic books. So we've got some of the grammar tools down, but how do we actually use them to share our personal experiences in a way that really connects with people, in a way that makes them feel something?
That's where the art of storytelling comes in. Even a simple retelling of events can be structured to grab attention and make your experience more relatable. And I think a fun way to see this in action is through a bit of role-playing.
I love that idea. Let's give it a try.
Okay, let's imagine a common scenario. Someone asking about your weekend. Imagine Sarah asking John, hey, John, did you do anything fun over the weekend?
Yeah, John, spill the beans. What did you get up to?
And I'll be John. Well, I went hiking with some friends on Saturday. It was a beautiful day.
Simple and to the point. You use the simple past tense to describe what you did, went, and was. It gives a clear picture of your activity.
Exactly. Now let's try a different scenario. Imagine someone asking about a first-time experience. Let's say Emily is asking David about his first day at a new job.
Okay, David, how was that first day? Were you nervous?
Yeah, a little nervous at first, but everyone was really friendly and helpful.
See? Past tense again.
Hmm.
Was and were. And you even added a bit about your feelings, which makes it more personal.
Right. And sometimes the best stories come from unexpected or funny incidents. How about we try a scenario where Lisa and Mark are talking about a funny childhood memory?
Okay, I'm Lisa. Hey, Mark, what's the most embarrassing thing you did as a kid? You've got to have at least one good story.
Oh man, there was this one time I tried to bake a cake for my mom's birthday and I completely forgot to add the sugar. It was a total disaster.
Oh, no, I bet she loved that. But you see, you're using the simple past tense again to tell the story. Tried, forgot, was.
These little role plays show how naturally we use past tense verbs to talk about what's happened. But to take our storytelling to the next level, a bit of structure can go a long way.
I agree. So how can we think about organizing a story about the past? What's a good approach?
A really useful framework is to think of it in 3 stages. First, you set the scene for your listener. You give them the context. For example, you might say, last summer I went on a road trip with my family. That tells them when, who, and what the general situation was.
Okay, so first we establish the setting, the when, the where, and the who.
Exactly. The second step is where you describe what actually happened. You narrate the sequence of events. Sticking with the road trip example, you might say, we drove along the coast, stopping at all these amazing beaches in quirky little towns.
Right. So we set the stage, and now we're getting into the heart of the story, the action. What's the final piece of the puzzle?
The third and final step is bringing your story to a close. This is where you wrap it up, sharing the outcome or how you felt about the experience or maybe even what you learned from it. You could say something like, it was an incredible trip full of unexpected adventures. It really brought us closer together as a family. This provides a sense of closure and often leaves a lasting impression on the listener.
So to recap this storytelling formula, first we set the scene, then we describe what happened, and finally we wrap up the narrative with a conclusion or reflection. It's a really clear and effective way to structure any story about the past, no matter how big or small.
Exactly. And just like any skill, the more you practice this structure, the more natural and effortless it will become. Now, before we wrap up our deep dive, I think it's worth pointing out some common mistakes people often make when talking about the past in English. Being aware of these can really boost your clarity and fluency.
That's a great point. Let's shed some light on these common errors.
One of the most frequent slip-ups is using present tense verbs when talking about past events. Someone might say, yesterday, I go to the store. But because of the time marker, yesterday, the verb needs to be in the past tense. Yesterday, I went to the store. The time frame dictates the verb tense.
Right. It's an easy mistake to make, especially when you're speaking spontaneously. What's another common pitfall?
Another issue is not giving enough context at the beginning of a story. Sometimes people jump straight into the details without setting the scene first. For instance, starting with the train was delayed leaves your listener hanging. They're wondering, well, what train? Where were you going? When was this? So a better approach would be, last week I was traveling to visit my sister and the train was delayed for over an hour. That gives your listener the background they need to follow along.
It's like walking into a movie halfway through and trying to figure out what's going on. It's so much easier to understand and engage with the story if we have that initial setup.
Precisely. And lastly, don't underestimate the power of transition words. These little words might seem insignificant, but they're crucial for creating a smooth and logical flow in your storytelling. They help to guide your listener through the sequence of events.
What are some examples of these helpful transition words, specifically when we're talking about the past?
Words like then, after that, suddenly, meanwhile, and finally are super useful. They act as signposts, showing the progression of time and the relationship between different events. So you might say something like, we had breakfast at the hotel, then we spent the morning exploring the city, and in the afternoon, we relaxed by the pool. These transitions make the story much clearer and easier to follow.
Okay, so let's quickly recap what we've covered in our deep dive into talking about the past. We explored how to use regular past tense verbs like listened and irregular ones like went. We learned how to form sentences using the simple past, the past continuous, and the past perfect tenses.
We also talked about those handy time phrases that clearly signal we're talking about the past, like a long time ago or just last week. And we looked at effective ways to share our personal experiences through those role-playing scenarios about a weekend hike, a first day at work, and a hilarious childhood baking disaster.
And remember that three-step storytelling formula: setting the scene, describing the events, and wrapping up with a conclusion. We also touched on some common mistakes to watch out for, like mixing up our present and past tenses or forgetting to set the scene properly. And of course, we emphasize the importance of using transition words like then and suddenly to create a smooth narrative.
Exactly. So here's your challenge for after this deep dive. Think of a past experience. It can be something big or small, and practice telling it in English, using all the techniques we've discussed. You can even jot down some notes or record yourself to see how it sounds.
That's a great takeaway. Well, thank you so much for joining us today for this deep dive into the art of talking about the past. It's been a pleasure exploring this with you.
It's been fun.
And to all our listeners out there, thank you for being here. Don't forget to tune in for more episodes of the Duo Dialogues, where we'll continue to unpack the intricacies of the English language. Until next time.